So today I'm going to be talking about a couple things with an index release. A lot of people, and I deal with this daily here at the shop, they pull it out of the package, they put it on, and the first thing they do is lengthen out this shank. They feel like it's too short in their hand. They're sitting there and like, there's no way that this could be right. So they lengthen it out and they say, okay, that feels good. You know, it's sitting right here, that'll be good. The problem with this is there's no pressure against that release. So they set it comfortable, they'll grab an arrow, load their bow up. When they draw, now when I get back, see how much longer it's pulling up against my hand? And they have to reach for that trigger like this. So one, my hand is almost floating back here because even though the string's in the right position, that release is so long, my hand is not really solid against my face. And it's much harder to execute a slow, steady squeeze when you're all the way out on the tip of your finger. So what I like to do is actually shorten that release up to where it almost feels like, well, it should feel like it's too short. And I have another one here, my personal one that I'll show you. So this is the True Ball short and sweet. I really like this because it's got a swept back trigger on it. I can play with the length just on the strap here. And I'll show you how short this actually is. So when I get this set to where I want it, when it's just sitting in my hand, you see where that's coming to? So generally, I think, you know, the head or the jaws of that release should sit right about this first knuckle line, somewhere between this, you know, like your knuckle pad here, your palm pads, and that first knuckle. The reason for this is anytime when we're shooting with an index, you don't want to be hanging on to the shank of that release. So just like the front hand can torque the bow this way, if I'm squeezing, if I'm hanging on to the release with these fingers and just using this finger, I'm actually inducing torque into that release. And you can test this at home. Draw back and squeeze your release and then let it go. And then squeeze it and let it go. And you'll feel the back of that arrow move. It's very hard to replicate the exact same amount of pressure every time. So what we want to do at full draw when we come in and anchor is relax these fingers and just let that release pull in a straight line, kind of like almost like a plumb bob in construction. So when we relax those fingers, that's generally when that release, like I was just showing you, lengthens out, and then people have trouble actually reaching it, and they're almost flicking down on the trigger instead of pulling straight back on the trigger. So with a release like this, and almost every release now you can adjust, you know, to where they're really short like this. You know, it's almost hard to get my fingers back behind that trigger, but I can still do it. And then when I draw, and I come in and anchor and relax those fingers, see, I can just come around that trigger. I don't have to like manipulate anything to get to that trigger. I just, boom, right there. And so now I've got good pressure on that trigger. I can just start pulling until the shot breaks. I don't know the exact numbers, but I know there's a hell of a lot more nerve endings in your finger than there is in this second knuckle. So you don't have that like feathery, like, oh, like touchy feel. You just bury that trigger, kind of the opposite of what you want to do on like a rifle. You bury that trigger deep in your finger. I can pull into that shot. That builds the initial pressure. And then I literally just think about, you know, essentially tightening my finger against that trigger and the shot will break. So a lot of people, I think, are robbed of draw length almost because their release is so long that they have to shorten up their draw length to where they can get their hand on their face. And then now that string is further forward and they have to duck to get into the string. And it's just this chain of events that make you more uncomfortable shooting, which leads to more misses essentially. So if this is something you're struggling with, I would highly recommend, you know, shorten that thing up to where you're like, there's no way this is right. But as long as you can get your fingers back behind the trigger when it's on the string, it should be good at full draw. Like I said, I like this release because that trigger is swept back. You can run the strap a little bit longer. And with that swept back trigger like that, you know, I don't have to reach as far forward. It's just a really comfortable trigger, no travel. They make this, like I said, this is the True Ball short and sweet. They do make it with a solid connect strap instead of this web. The one I was showing you before, this is the B3 Hawk, and I have this one extended out almost all the way, but you can see I can slide that thing down and shorten that up a lot too, to where, you know, I can come in and really get that trigger buried in that finger. Another thing I see with people who are out here on the tip of their finger is, I call it like TPing. And what I mean by that is a lot of this has to do with your wrist alignment, but also your hand. So let's say your release is short, but you're still feeling like you can barely, you're only getting the tip of your finger on it. What's probably happening is get that release hooked up, draw, and they come over and they do this. So see how the top of my hand is kind of making like a teepee, like a triangle? So they come in and they go like this. You want that wrist to almost be like, I don't want to bend my knuckles there. I want to be able to reach forward. Again, this trigger is a little bit long, but I shouldn't have to do, I don't want to be here with my release hand. I want to be here. So basically a flat line from the top of my wrist straight back. Finger comes on, squeeze one, squeeze two, squeeze, and execute. So those things, if you're having trouble, you feel like you're always really touching on the tip of your finger, those things will really help. Shorten up that release, you know, basically keeping the top of the hand and the wrist to the elbow all in a straight line versus making a little teepee with your knuckles like this. And you should have a lot more control over that trigger. Like I said, it's, for me and a lot of other guys, it's much easier to control a slow squeeze when you have more leverage on that trigger than trying to do it with the very tip of your finger. So give that a whirl. I think most people run the release a little too long, especially newer shooters. Like every time we have a new shooter and I put a release on them, every time they say it's too short. I'm like, no. Like, let's shoot a couple times. You'll see why. And once they do it a few times, they understand the concept. But if you have a release that doesn't, like some of the cheaper releases don't have any way to lengthen and shorten them. So if you're experiencing this issue and you don't have a release so you can adjust the length, you might want to consider jumping into a new release. The B3 Hawk is great. Like I said, this True Ball Short and Sweet. The Spot Hog Wise Guy is probably our best seller. Kind of a weird fact here. So the Wise Guy comes with a BOA buckle, like ratchet system, as well as the standard buckle like this. The shank of the release, for whatever reason, on the buckle is actually shorter than on the BOA. And I don't know if that just has to do with where it connects on the wrist strap, but keep that in mind. If you have a BOA and it still feels too long, you can get the buckle strap for it, and it will shorten that up a little bit. So anyway, just a little tip. Like I said, it's one of those small things that can make a big difference in your accuracy and your comfort. So yeah, swing by. We can play with that sort of thing. Sometimes you need to mess. When you do that, you might have to change your peep height or your D-loop length a little bit, but ultimately we should be able to get you into a really comfortable anchor point to where, I don't have any tension in this hand. Like, tension is your enemy in archery. So if I'm back here and I'm, squeezing this release really, really hard and everything's tense, that's going to result in misses. So we want to be relaxed. We want to be comfortable. We want leverage on that trigger. And like I said, most of these releases have the ability to do that these days. So anyway, just a little tip on the range here. And yeah, happy shooting. Hunt hard, hunt safe, be kind.